let's now continue with our developments for the person class. Okay, so we have already got 3 attributes for the person class over here. So we got name, we have weights, and we have heights. So now, before we can test our code, let's have a way to really create instances of person. And in Java, this is something called constructor. Okay, so now already here. Okay, so after attributes, so you always start with your class with the attributes. And then after enumerating all the attributes, in this case, we got name, weights, and heights. Let's now try to define so-called constructors. Define, and you can define one or more constructors typically, but let's say just for one, just make it easy. Define a constructor for creating instances of person. Okay, let's see how we can do that. And the convention is you're gonna say public. Okay, the constructor must be public, meaning that any other class, any outside this particular person class, anywhere, for example, controller, or typically the controller, anywhere in the project can actually use this constructor. So it has to be public. Okay, public. And then the name, when we say a constructor, it's a special kind of method or behavior. So now the name of the constructor, you have no choice. It must be the same as the class name, person. And then over here, so parentheses over here, we declare the so-called parameters. Or you can think of them as inputs. So how do I create a person? I need to pass 3 inputs. I got to pass the name, weight, and height. Okay, this constructor has 3 parameters, i.e. inputs. In order to I'm not too sure why I got into this, but let's in order to create instances. Okay, so now the way we define the parameters for any method, including constructor, is by having comma separated parameter. And for each parameter, we're going to declare them, the type and the name. Okay, we can say string. So now we can either say, so let me show you a very standard way of doing this. So now we know that somehow we're gonna pass name, weight, and height, right? As we can see from the GUI over here. Let me just show you that very quickly. So under resources, under layout, and under the XML file, you can see that we're gonna pass 3 inputs to the to create the instances of person. You have name, you have integer weights, and you have real number weights, you have real number heights. Okay, let's go back there to the person class. Let's see. So the first parameter, the order does not matter. Okay, just really up to you. So now I deliberately chose the name to be the same name as the attributes. Okay, or I can choose a different name. So maybe without any confusion, let's say we just use a different name, okay? Just to begin with. Let's say, I would say N for name. And then I would say double for, and then double heights, okay? You can see somehow the way I do it, so N is some input we take, and the type of the name must be compatible with the name that we're going to change. And also the W is going to be used as the value for the weights. And also H is going to be the value for the heights. Okay, I'll explain to you, just run some example code to show you how it works. And then over here, what should we do? So as soon as, whenever we are trying to call this constructor here, we're going to create a new instance. And then we're going to say, let me just write this down and then I'll explain to you in just a moment. We're going to say this, which is a keyword in Java. This dot, so over here, this means the current objects that we are talking about, the context objects. But I will show you how the context object looks like in just a moment. And then when you say dot, Android Studio give you at least the option for all the attributes. Choose name over here. So equal sign means it's assigned to. Okay, I will explain to you what assigned to means really in just a moment. It's assigned to n over here, and this dot weight is assigned to w, and also this dot height is assigned to h. Okay, what does this mean? I'll just give you one since this is the very first time we see the assignments, so I want to explain that properly. So now when we write some variable name v, okay, is equals some expression e. Okay, v is okay. We intend to assign a value e on the right hand side. On the right hand side to the variable v on the left hand side. Okay, so now in this case, that means we are going to assign the value of this input n over here, all right, is correspond to that. Okay, we're going to assign this value here to be the new value for this variable, which is the class attributes, right, name. And then we're going to assign the input value w into the view to be the new value for the weights. And then we're going to assign the new the input value h to be the new value for heights. Okay, we're going to see exactly how this is going to work in just a moment. Okay, after this, so now we're done with the constructor. So now let's do a test right away, and then I'll show you how exactly you can see the programming effects. So now let's go to person tester over here. So now in the tester here, we're going to test if our person class is correct. So how do we do that? We have to somehow manipulate the objects by creating new ones and try to call some methods. Okay, so now let's see how we can create a new objects. Create a new person instance. So this is how we do it. I'll show you exactly the line, and then I'll explain that. We say person, let's say P1. That's the name of the person. What is new person? And then remember, if you come back here, you can see there are 3 inputs expected for the person constructor, right? So now we're gonna give 3 inputs. Let's say Jin, and the weights, let's say 80 kilograms, and then height 1.85 meters. Okay, so now what I would do is I'll show you on the paper exactly how this works, and then I'll verify that with you together on the computer. Okay, there are 2, you should know both ways. Okay, so now so now let's try to explain what the idea is to create a new objects of person class on the paper, and then we verify this using the debugger tool in Android Studio. You should know both. Okay, let's now, first of all, let's remind ourselves what we have. First of all, we have the class called person. So you got public class and person. And then we got 3 attributes. We have string, name, we have double weights, and we also have double heights. So these are the 3 attributes, and we also define the constructor, right? So we got public and the same name as the class for constructor, and then we have 3 parameters, namely 3 inputs for the constructor. And then over here we got string n, and also we have double w, and also we have double and then h. Okay, so these are the 3 inputs. And then what's the definition for the constructor? Over here we have this, which is a keyword in Java. This dot name is assigned to n, and also this dot weights is assigned to W, and also this dot heights is assigned to H. So that's what we have over here. So that's the class definition for the person. Okay, let's now draw very conceptually also how the person tester looks like. Okay, also we have our class person tester. Okay, person tester over here, and then somewhere down the line we actually said something like person P1 is assigned to a new. New is a keyword, so whenever I have any keyword I will just highlight in underline. Okay, is assigned to new person. And then over here I have Jim, and then I have 80. Oh, I believe I have 85, right? Let's go back to the person tester here. 80 and 1.85, okay? 80 and 1.85. Let's see exactly how this is going to work. So the way I would like to explain this is by divide this this line over here into 3 parts. Okay, I would say this is part number 1. This is part number 1. Okay, and this part here is number 2. And then this part here is number 3. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and let's try to see exactly how they work together. Okay, this is number 1, number 2, and number 3. Okay, and now I'm going to put some description over here, and then meanwhile I'm going to draw some diagram. Okay, so okay, let me just clear over here so I have enough space. Okay, I think it's better to use as much space as possible. Okay, so the person class is only around here. Okay, that's a person class. Okay, so now let's think about what 1, 2, and 3 really means. Okay, number 1 is green, so let's use green. Number 1 is creates allocates. Okay, let's say this creates an objects. Okay, let me be 100% precise. Okay, okay. Number 1 allocates in memory some space for a person objects. Okay, and then for a person objects with the assign with the input value, with the input values. Okay, actually step number 1 is the most complicated, but let's deal with that. Okay, imagine that this is your computer memory. Okay, it's going to be a sequence of bytes. Okay, but conceptually we're just going to say inside that somewhere in the middle, okay, you might have some data here, you might also get some data here, but now this portion over here is going to be allocated for this particular object that we are creating. Okay, so this is a, and this is going to store the information for the person objects. So I'm just going to put a person over here. Okay, it's going to be a person objects, and we know that every person object has name, weights, and heights. So that's exactly what I'm going to put over here. So that's going to be name, weights, and also heights. So these are the 3 attributes. Okay, in somewhere in the memory, somewhere you don't have to worry about how this can be done. You just have to know what you will achieve. Somewhere in the memory, we allocate this portion of memory over here, and it's going to be used to store the information about this particular instance. Okay, so now the question is, what should be the value over here? 1, 2, and 3, the name, the weight, and height. So now you can see we got the input over here. We have the input value gen, 80, and 1.85. But how do we store them? Okay, it has to be up to the constructor, because we know that over here we are actually calling the constructor over here. Okay, you can see person over here is the constructor name for the person over here. Okay, so that means we're calling this particular method, we are reusing its block of code. And then we're going to somehow do the following instantiation. Let me just draw you a quick analogy. Think about how you were doing mathematics. So now if I define a mathematical function called add, and then I say x and y. You can think of x and y are the parameters for this particular add function. And I say it's defined as x plus y. Okay, that's mathematics. So now what does it really mean when I say add? I put 3 here and 5 here. So that means I'm going to apply this definition here with x being instantiated to be 3 and y to be instantiated as 5. So I got exactly 3 plus 5, which will give me 8. Okay, so that's mathematics, where we have some general definition over here. So this is pretty much like the definition for the constructor or any method. And this one over here is when we are trying to call that particular method, we're going to instantiate every parameter position-wise, every parameter by the input values. Okay, in this case 3 to instantiate x and 5 to instantiate y, and apply this definition over here. So that's why we got 8. Okay, we'll do exactly the same thing in the programming context. And over here, what should we do? Over here, you can see that what we will do is, so now we're going to say, since we talk about this particular object over here, okay, so now this over here is going to refer to this particular object. So I'll just put this over here conceptually. Okay, so this means this particular object that we have just created. And then when you say this.name, that means this object and go to its name attributes. And when you say this.weight, it's this, and then with the weight attributes, and this.height refers to this particular portion of the memory. Okay, so now when you say this.name is assigned to. Okay, what does that mean? That means whatever value that n has been instantiated into is going to be stored in this particular location. Okay, for example, over here you can see Jim is going to instantiate n over here. That means every occurrence of n is going to be replaced by Jim. That means over here it should be Jim. Okay, and this is going 80 is going to instantiate w. So that means w is going to be 80, and then h is going to be 1.85, and then it's going to be 1.85. Okay, so now that means we're going to store Jim into this.name. So Jim is going to be stored over here, and then 80 is going to be stored into this.weights, 80 here, and 1.85 is going to be stored into this.heights, so 1.85. Okay, you can see this complicated process. First of all, we create an object in the memory of type person, and then with the name, weight, and height attributes, because we got person class and we got name, weight, and height. That's a mini step for the step number 1. And the second mini step for step number 1 is since we are calling this constructor over here, so we're going to instantiate every parameter over here by the input value that we have over here. We have some special name. Let me just mention that right away. So here, okay, let me use a different color here. So we call these, for example, let's say the N, W, and H. So these are parameters. Okay, and the Jim, 80, and 1.85, they are called arguments. And similar in the case of the mathematics over here, you can think of the x and y, they are parameters. The parameters are the names for you to use when you want to write up your definitions. And so 3 and 5 over here are your arguments. Okay, just some terminology. Okay, so when we apply this person constructor over here, we're going to instantiate Jin, n over here by Jin, and w over here by 80, and h here by 1.85 because this keyword over here is really important. This simply means the current object that we are talking about. That means the current context objects. And the context object that we are talking about is really referring to the new object that we are creating in the memory, which is this. This is a context object, right? As we said before, so that's this. Okay, so after step number 1, the other 2 steps are much easier. Okay, once you understand step number 1, which we created the objects in the memory, and also we initialize all the attribute value to be the appropriate ones. So now let's do the step number 2, which will be blue. Okay, now step number 2. Okay, step number 2. So now for step number 2, which refers to this part of the line over here. So this is like a declaration, like what we did before, right? We declare attributes or declare variables. So step number 2, declare a variable P1 that stores. Okay, so what does it store? So now over here, since we are creating some kind of objects over here, so what's the type of value that we store? So for now, I want you to understand from day 1. So what we are storing is store the address of some person objects. Okay, what's really important is over here. So when we talk about the address, okay, the address is really the key over here. So declare variable P1 that stores the address of some person objects. So for example, the object that we just created in step number 1, it can be a candidate for storing its address. So we don't store the entire objects, including its name, weight, and height. We don't do that because in general, the object structure, the number of attributes might be huge. So for space efficiency, we don't store the entire object over here. We simply store its address. So we have a way to look up its address and go to the memory location. So for example, now, just hypothetically, let's say for this particular object that we just created, let me just go back to step number 1 a little bit. Let me put it in green. So because we know that in the memory is a sequence of bytes, so the address will be a binary number. For example, this address here, let's say the starting address for this one here, for this object here is 00x002, for example. Sorry, not x. 001. I just make it up, but hopefully just illustrate. So this is the starting address. Starting address of this objects. Okay, in that case, so that means this address value over here can be stored. This is a good candidate to be stored in this particular variable because P1 is declared to store address of objects. Okay, that's step number 2. So the last step, which would be step number 3. Okay, for step number 3, over here, I'm gonna use pink. Okay, for step number 3, now it's easy because from step number 1, we actually create a new object over here with some address over here. And for step number 2, we declare some variable which can store address. For step number 3, store the address. Okay, store the address of the new objects into P1. Okay, that means over here in step number 2, what we have is something like this. In step number 2, we actually got P1 as a variable, which is a placeholder. So the placeholder is over here. It can store any address value. That's from step number 1. But now in step number 3, we simply store this value over here. So put 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1 over there. Okay. Now let me just draw one more diagram, and then I will just recap. Okay. Conceptually, you can think of after this whole line, after step 1, 2, and 3, what we can, the way we can visualize this whole process is like this. We have P1, which is so-called a reference variable, which means it stores address. Okay, so P1 actually stores the address of some objects in the memory. So we simply use an arrow to signify this. Okay, it stores an objects. So whenever we draw objects, we use a box over here. So you should know how to draw, to visualize things. And then over here, the type of the object is a person. So P1 stores the address of this particular object. We don't have to draw the memory address. We don't have to. Conceptually, that'll be enough. And then this person over here has 3 attributes. It has the name, it has the weights, it has the heights. And then in this case, the name will be Jim 80 1.85. Jim 80 and 1.85. So that's what we have done. Okay. So that's what's really achieved by this particular line. When you say person P1 is assigned to a new person over here, and then we pass Jim 80 1.85. That's what we have done. Okay, let's verify this also, but it's really important for you to go over. That's why I'm recording this as a video, so you can rewatch how I actually build up this kind of reasoning from scratch. You want to keep watching it until really understand it. It's really important that you understand this very well. How calling the constructor is going to initialize the values for the attributes. Okay, so now let's see how we can verify this on the computer. Okay, let's go back to Android Studio, and then there's some tool I would like to show you in Android Studio, which is very useful as, for you as a programmer. So go to person tester over here, and then we want to somehow see how this line is going to be executed, and that's going to be done in exactly the same way as I just described. Okay, we're going to use a tool called Debugger. Okay, let me just write it down. Basically, we're going to use the breakpoints and debugger. So this is what we're going to use to illustrate the same phenomenon. Just understand that from a different perspective. Okay, we're going to set a breakpoint. The way to set it is very easy. So now we want to say, before the computer trying to execute this line, we want the computer to pause. Okay, and the way to do that is to set up a breakpoint. Okay, you can see this bar over here, gray bar, and then because I want to set a breakpoint right before this line, I will just put a breakpoint beside that. Just left click. You will see there's a red breakpoint over here. So that means when I try to launch my program, it's going to pause over here, and then we can do a slow motion on executing that line of code. Okay, let's see how we can do that. Okay, so now once you put a breakpoint there, I want you to look at, usually we just say run. Don't do this time. Okay, we're gonna find the button beside that, debug tester. Okay, debug actually should be debug person tester, in which case what we can do is we can right click, okay, and then debug. So every time when you debug, we want to make sure that's really debugging the right tester, because now we got tester and person tester, but we want to debug person tester. Okay, so the safest way to do is to right click on the person tester, the one you want to debug, and then rather than run, we're going to say debug. Okay, so if you click on that, what we expect to see is we're going to see that the execution of this line is going to pause in the very beginning because we set a breakpoint right beside the line. That means the execution is gonna pause over there until further instruction from us. Okay, what I want you to see that is now you can see that the execution is paused over here. That's why you see a check mark over here. And now I want you to look at the panel over here. So now we are executing the main method, and now we pause at this particular line. I believe that's line 10. Okay. And over here, there's something called variables. So variables are all the relevant variables that the program has created. At the moment, there's no variable just yet because this the point that we have stopping at is before we try to execute this line. That's even before P1 was declared, right? So now what I want you to do is I want you to use a feature over here. Okay, you can see this arrow over here. Let's go over one by one. Don't click just yet. Move your mouse over. This one here is called step into. That means we can step into the constructor in this case to see how the constructor works. Or we can say step over. Step over means we're going to just go to the next line and then see exactly what that line that we put a breakpoint on has what's kind of the effect that has been created by that line that we just executed. Okay, so now let's say step into. So I would say for now you can either say step over or step into. So these are the common options. But now since we want to see exactly how the person constructor has been executed, so let's say step into. Okay, when you say step into, so now you will see that we switch the context from person tester into person. And this corresponds to what I said before, because when we were trying to call the person constructor over here, we are really trying to call the person constructor over here. That's defined. Okay. And then over here, you will see that we got N has been instantiated into Jim, W has been instantiated as 80, and H has been instantiated as 1.85, right? That's what we have seen before. Okay, that just corresponds to what I just said. So now, also you have this. This is the object that we have just created in the memory. And look at that. So this is now before we try to assign N, W, and H to the corresponding attribute. That's why the values currently for name, weight, and height, they do not make much sense. So these are just default values, which you don't have to worry for now. Okay. Now I want you to go step by step. Okay. So now we are in person class, and now let's go for step over. Okay. This one here, step over. Okay, so now we're going to say, now before executing this line, we have this.name is null, which doesn't make sense, but we're going to assign that to N, which is Jim. Okay, and then if you say step over, I want you to pay attention to this line here. Watch for this. This one I highlighted. The name is going to be changed. As soon as I say step over this line, name will be changed to Jim. Okay, and then as I say step over, you can see name has been changed to Jim. Okay. And then at this point here, this.weight, we haven't executed that line yet, so it's going to be 0. But now I want you to watch for this change over here in this line here. As soon as I say step over, this.weight will be changed to W, which is 80. Okay, say step over again. So now you can see that weight has been changed to 80. And then we can do heights. And then we can say step in over again. You can see now it becomes 1.85. So you can see this process here is exactly what I explained on the paper. So you should really also try to use a debugger, because as we will see, as your program gets more complicated, nobody can help you. You are the only one to help yourself by using the debugger. Okay. Okay. So if you want to stop the debugger, you can just click on this red button here and then say stop. Okay. A small exercise for you will be, let me just try to add a new line over here. I'm not going to run the debugger again, but I'll just try to show you very quickly on the paper, and then we are done for this video. Okay, you can say person P2, just another instance with the variable name P2. P2 is declared as a person placeholder, as a person address placeholder. New, and calling the same constructor over here, and then we're gonna have, let's say, Jonathan let's say 85 and then 1.76, for example. Okay, just another object. So now you can you're highly encouraged to try to also put a breakpoint over here, and then try to see exactly how this constructor is being called and executed for the second time. Okay, I'll leave that to you as an exercise. If you want to delete the breakpoint, just click on that. It's gone. Now, I want to show you how it is going to work on the paper. Okay, let's switch to paper over here. So now, what we had before was when we try to call gen 80 1.85, we instantiate n to be gen, w to be 80, and h to be 1.85. In fact, every occurrence of gen, every occurrence of n has been replaced by gen. Every occurrence of w has been replaced by 80. Every occurrence of h has been replaced by 1.85. So now, let's say we're trying to make a second call over here. Okay, I am not too sure if I got space over here, but what about I just put it here? When I say, okay, it is over here, I would say person P2. Over here is new person calling the same constructor over here, and then I would say Jonathan. And then let me remind myself what the values are. 85, 1.676. 85 and 1.76. Okay, so these are the three arguments for this particular call to the constructor. And let me now use a different color over here. So now let's say over here, so the Jonathan 85 and 1.76, these are going to instantiate n, w, and h respectively. Okay, let's do that very quickly. So that means we're going to call the same constructor but with different input values. So now let me just use what can be a good color here. What about just blue? Okay, so now over here, n is going to be replaced by Jonathan in this case. In fact, every occurrence of n is going to be replaced by Jonathan. And then every occurrence of w over here is going to be replaced by 85. Okay, w over here is going to be replaced by 85. And also, every occurrence of h over here is going to be replaced by 1.76. Okay, every occurrence of h, 1.76. Let's now use a highlighter to help us to understand. Okay, now you can see that over here, Jonathan is going to be Jonathan here and Jonathan here, right? To replace the n over here. And then also 85 is going to replace 85 here for w and 85 here. And then 1.76 to replace h and replace h over here. You can see we're just trying to do two different instantiations because we have two separate calls to this, the same constructor. Okay, that's really something you should really try to understand. So once you have defined your constructor over here, you may call that for as many times as you like. Every time you call that, you're going to see what kind of input value you're going to instantiate the parameters into. Okay. Okay, so you should really try to get everything that we try to teach you in this video. There are many things. You may want to keep rewatching this until you really get it.